Still no boyfriend? At 32, that's just embarrassing. My sister didn't mutter those words under her breath. She announced them clearly and deliberately, in the middle of our family's Thanksgiving dinner, while 30 relatives sat packed around 2 long tables in my parents' dining room in Mississauga, plates heaped with turkey and stuffing, the room warm and amber under the chandelier. My mother had spent an entire Saturday polishing. The conversation stopped the way it always does when something sharp lands in a quiet room. My aunt set down her fork. 2 of my cousins looked away. My mother studied the gravy boat as though it had suddenly become the most interesting object in the province. My father took a long sip of his wine. My sister smiled and leaned forward, the way she always did when she had an audience and knew it. Maybe by next Thanksgiving you'll actually bring someone to the table. I took a slow breath. I picked up my water glass. I looked at her steadily. Actually, I said, I've been married for 8 months. The room went so quiet I could hear the furnace click on. My name is Annika Brewer. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a clinical pharmacist at a mid-sized hospital in downtown Toronto. I've spent the last decade building a career that actually matters to me, reviewing medication plans for patients, catching drug interactions before they become emergencies, consulting alongside physicians and nurses on the wards. Most of it happens quietly, at a screen, in the margins of other people's crises. But I love it, and I'm good at it. I finished my PharmD at the University of Toronto and went straight into the hospital system. I bought my own condo in the West End 4 years ago, a 2-bedroom unit on the 4th floor with a small balcony that faces west, and I paid the down payment on it entirely by myself, scraping together every extra dollar through 2 years of overnight weekend shifts. I make my mortgage payments every month without asking anyone for help. I don't say that to prove something. I say it because by the time that Thanksgiving arrived, my family had spent years treating my life as though it amounted to nothing more than its most visible absence. The empty chair at the table where a husband should have been sitting. That's the particular cruelty of being the daughter who doesn't cause problems. Eventually, everyone treats your quiet competence as a given, and the only thing they notice is what you haven't done yet. My sister is 2 years younger than me. She married at 26 and by all appearances, and my mother would remind you of this at every possible opportunity, had done everything in the right order. The house in Oakville, the 2 kids, the RESP accounts already opened for both of them before the younger one had learned to walk. She had followed a version of the life my parents had quietly imagined for both of us, and because she had done it first, and done it visibly, she became the proof of concept everyone else was supposed to aspire toward. I was the other version of the experiment. I had done things differently, and my family had never quite forgiven me for it. Growing up, when my sister made a mistake, forgot a school assignment, came home late, crashed the car at 17 on an icy January morning, it was explained away within the week. She was spirited. She had so much going on. That's just how she is. When I did well, there was rarely any ceremony about it. My acceptance to the PharmD program earned a brief nod from my father and a quick smile from my mother. That same evening, my sister's volleyball team photo arrived in the mail, and my mother spent 20 minutes finding the right frame for it. I stopped expecting congratulations a long time ago. What I noticed instead was the other pattern, the one that arrived at every family gathering without fail, as reliable as the October weather. It didn't matter what I had accomplished since the last dinner. The first question was always the same. Are you seeing anyone? And when the answer was no, or when I tried to move the conversation somewhere else, my sister would pick it up and run with it. She had a gift for it. She could turn a simple question into a 10-minute performance that left everyone at the table either laughing or looking at me with something that felt uncomfortably close to pity. I got used to smiling through it. I got good at changing subjects. I learned exactly how long I had to stay before I could leave without anyone thinking I was upset, and I was never, ever stupid enough to tell my family anything real about my personal life, because the one time I had, when I was 27 and genuinely happy with someone for the first time in years, my sister had turned it into a recurring joke about how I had finally found a man patient enough to wait for me to get myself together. That relationship ended for reasons that had nothing to do with my sister. But the joke lasted 2 more Christmases. So I kept things close. It wasn't paranoia. It was just something I had learned. I met my husband a little over 2 years ago, through near work, technically. He was brought in to consult on a structural assessment of the older wing of the hospital where I work, a building evaluation contracted by the hospital board before a major renovation. He's a structural engineer, and he spent several months on site that spring and into the summer. We didn't meet in any dramatic way. He showed up in the staff lounge one morning carrying a set of blueprints he was trying to unroll on the only available table, which happened to be the one where I was eating lunch. I moved my bag. He apologized twice for taking up the space. I told him once was enough. He laughed. We had coffee that same afternoon and talked for longer than either of us had planned. He was easy to be around in a way I hadn't expected. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers, which I realize sounds like the bare minimum but isn't always easy to find. He didn't try to explain my job back to me or fill pauses with noise. When I talked about the parts of hospital pharmacy work that frustrated me, the budget cuts, the way medication management was still undervalued at the administrative level, he followed along and asked the right things. We started having lunch together on days he was on site, then dinner once at a ramen place on Queen Street West that neither of us had been to before. Then, more dinners after that. He came with me to a colleague's birthday in the fall, the first time he was in a room with people who knew me, and I noticed he was just himself. He didn't perform. He didn't try to win anyone over. He sat beside me and contributed when he had something worth contributing. A few months into things, I told him about my family, not all at once, not in any particular order, just the shape of it. The dynamic between me and my sister, the way family gatherings tended to go, the habit everyone had developed of treating my relationship status as though it were a character flaw that needed correcting. He listened to all of it without offering to fix it or suggesting I was reading too much into things. What he said when I finished was, "That sounds exhausting, and it sounds like it's been going on for a really long time." That was the moment I understood I had found someone who actually saw me. He met my parents once briefly, at a dinner I reluctantly agreed to attend. He was warm and easy to talk to. On the drive home stuck in construction traffic on the 401, he asked if my sister was always like that. I tried to shrug it off. "Just family humor," I said, "you know how it goes." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Humor is supposed to be funny for everyone in the room. If you're the only one not laughing, it isn't really a joke." I've thought about that sentence many times since. When he proposed, on a Saturday morning in our kitchen, completely without ceremony, just the two of us and a ring he had been carrying in his coat pocket for 3 weeks, because he kept waiting for the right moment, and then deciding it wasn't quite right enough. I said yes before he had finished asking. We agreed quickly on what we wanted: small, private, intentional. We flew to Kelowna in late January, stayed at a small inn on the lakeshore, and got married in the inn's courtyard on a cold, bright afternoon with 6 people who loved us. 2 of my closest friends from university, 2 of his colleagues who had become real friends, his sister and her partner, who drove up from Vancouver, a local officiant who was warm and unhurried and said exactly the right things. It was the best day of my life, and it belonged entirely to us. We decided not to tell my family right away. I want to be clear about this. It was not a decision made in anger or in spite. It was a decision made in self-preservation, and my husband understood it without needing much explanation. We had both watched what happened when I brought anything personal into a family gathering. It became a topic, then a punchline, then a reference that outlasted the original event by years. I wasn't willing to let our marriage become that. I wasn't willing to give my sister the material. We agreed we'd tell them when the moment felt right, on our terms, without it being extracted from us mid-performance. Neither of us imagined it would happen the way it did. My parents host Thanksgiving every year in the same house I grew up in, a brick detached in the older part of Mississauga, with a formal dining room that seats 14 comfortably and 30 uncomfortably, which is always what they attempted anyway. My mother starts preparing 2 days early. My father handles the turkey and the drinks with equal seriousness. That October, about 30 relatives had gathered from across the GTA and as far as Hamilton. My husband drove me out from Toronto and planned to join later in the evening. He had a project deadline and needed to finish documentation from home first. We had arranged it that way deliberately. He had the address. I told him I'd text when I was ready for him to head over. I arrived in the early afternoon, greeted aunts and uncles, helped carry dishes from the kitchen, and tried to exist as peacefully as possible in a house where peace had always required effort. My sister arrived 20 minutes after me, with her husband and both kids, which immediately reorganized the room around her. My mother made the sounds she always made when the grandchildren arrived. My father scooped up the youngest and carried him to the living room. I stood in the kitchen doorway holding a bowl of cranberry sauce, watching the house reassemble itself into the version that had always excluded me by default. Some things never change. Dinner started well enough. There is something genuinely lovely about a full table in October, the food, the warmth, the particular low light that comes through Canadian windows in autumn. I sat between my cousin and my aunt, which was comfortable, and for a while the conversation moved through the usual channels. Work updates, the kids' activities, someone's kitchen renovation, property taxes, which apparently everyone in Oakville had strong feelings about this year. Then, somewhere in the pause between the main course and dessert, my sister turned to face me across the table. She had the look she always got before saying something she knew would land. A kind of bright, rehearsed concern. "So," she said loud enough for the whole table, "anyone new in your life?" I said no and tried to move on. She didn't let it move on. "Still? Annika, you're 32. She let out a small laugh, the kind designed to soften something that wasn't soft at all. "Don't you think it's time to get serious about this? I worry about you." Someone at the far end of the table made a sound that wasn't quite laughter and wasn't quite agreement. My cousin shifted beside me. My aunt became very interested in her stuffing. My mother kept her eyes carefully on the table in front of her. I said something vague about being busy with work. My sister lifted her wine glass. "Busy isn't a life plan." A few people laughed. She smiled wider. "Still no boyfriend?" she said then, dropping the concern entirely and letting the performance be what it was. "At 32, that's just embarrassing." She said it clearly, loudly, with the full table listening. "Maybe by next Thanksgiving, you'll actually bring someone home." The room held its breath. Outside the dining room window, the maple in my parents' front yard was fully turned, its leaves orange and beginning to fall against the gray October sky. I looked at it for one moment, then I looked at my sister. I picked up my water glass, took one slow sip and set it back down. "Actually," I said, "I've been married for 8 months." What followed was the specific weighted silence that settles over a room when something has shifted so completely that no one knows yet how to move. My sister blinked, then she let out a short laugh, the kind people produce when they haven't decided yet whether something is a joke. "Come on," she said. "That's not funny." "I'm not trying to be funny." She looked at me the way she always looked at me when I didn't respond the way she expected. "If you were actually married, you would have told us." I didn't answer that. My mother had gone pale. "Married," she repeated slowly, as though testing whether the word meant what she thought it did. "What are you talking about? To who?" My father set his fork down. "If this is true, where is he?" I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice or try to defend myself. I took out my phone, opened it, sent one short text, and set the phone face down on the table. Then I waited. The conversation fractured into quiet, uncertain exchanges around me. I heard my aunt say something to the person beside her. I heard a cousin ask another cousin what was happening. My sister crossed her arms and said, loudly, "She's making this up. She's embarrassed and she's making it up." No one agreed with her. No one disagreed either. 4 minutes passed. The doorbell rang. My mother started to stand. My father half rose. I said, "I'll get it," and I walked to the front door and opened it. My husband was standing on the front porch in his coat, holding a bakery box, the butter tart pie we had ordered from a place in Kensington Market the day before, which I had completely forgotten about until that exact moment. He looked at my face and understood immediately that things had moved faster than we had planned for. "Hey," he said quietly. "Hey," I said, "come in." He followed me back to the dining room. 30 people looked at him. He looked back at them, calm and unhurried, and then he found my face in the room and held it for a moment. "Sorry I'm a bit late," he said. He held up the box. "Had to pick this up on the way." He set it on the sideboard, turned to face the table and said clearly, "I'm Anika's husband. It's good to meet everyone." The room didn't move. My sister was very still. She looked at him the way you look at something you were certain wasn't real and now has to be accounted for. My husband came and stood beside me. He didn't make any grand gesture toward the crowd. He just stood beside me, the way he always did, and our wedding rings caught the light from the chandelier. Mine on the left hand I had kept carefully off the tabletop all evening, his on the hand he had just used to set down the pie box. Several people noticed at the same time. My aunt was the first to speak. She said softly, "Oh my goodness." My mother pressed her fingers over her mouth. My father sat without moving. I opened my phone and passed it to my aunt, who was nearest. Our wedding photographs. The lakeshore, the courtyard, the officiant. My husband beside me in the gray coat he had bought for the occasion. Both of us laughing at something someone had said just before the ceremony started, caught by his colleague who also did photography on weekends. My aunt looked at the photographs for a long moment, then she passed the phone to the person beside her. It moved around the table slowly, like something important being shared carefully. No one laughed. No one made a sound that wasn't soft. My sister watched the phone travel around the table, and said nothing. When it reached the far end, my older cousin looked up at me and asked quietly, "Why didn't you tell us?" I had prepared for many possible questions. That particular one I hadn't expected to feel so gentle. Because every time I brought something personal to this table, I said, it became a topic, and then a joke, and then a reference that outlasted the original event by years. I looked around at the people I had been eating Thanksgiving dinner with my entire life. I wanted one thing that was just mine. One thing that didn't have to survive this room before it was even fully real yet. No one argued. My aunt set down her fork. "I've watched how these dinners go for a long time," she said, not loudly but clearly, and I should have said something before now. I knew it wasn't just teasing. My cousin beside me nodded slowly. "I remember when you got into the PharmD program," he said. "You told the whole table." My aunt switched the conversation to your sister's job within 5 minutes. Nobody asked you what campus you'd be at. Someone else remembered a birthday a few years ago. Another cousin brought up a summer barbecue where my sister had announced, to general laughter, that I was still figuring out adulthood. I had been 29 at the time and had just made my first mortgage payment on my own. Memory by memory, the room began to see something it had been looking past for a very long time. My husband stood beside me through all of it. He didn't direct the conversation or interject. He just held his ground quietly, the way he always did, and occasionally caught my eye with an expression that said, "I'm here." My sister had been silent for a long time. Finally she stood. Her voice was sharp and unsteady. "I cannot believe this. You spent months hiding a marriage from your own family so you could do this." She gestured at the room. "You planned all of it to embarrass me." I looked at her without raising my voice. "You asked me a question," I said. I answered it. She looked around the table for allies, and found none. The faces that had laughed at her jokes, only minutes earlier, looked back at her with something unreadable and not warm. My aunt said, "Anika isn't the one who owes anyone an explanation tonight." No one disagreed. My sister sat back down. She didn't apologize. She didn't say another word for the rest of the evening. But she had finally completely run out of audience, and somehow, that was its own kind of reckoning. In the days that followed, my phone collected messages in a way it hadn't in years. My aunt called first. She apologized for the times she had let comments slide without pushing back, for telling herself it wasn't her place when it had always been, in part, her place. I thanked her and meant it. My cousin sent a long text that ended, "For what it's worth, I always thought you were the one who had it together. I just never said so out loud. I'm starting to understand that was part of the problem." Other relatives reached out one by one. Some shared things I hadn't known, moments they'd witnessed, comments they'd heard, times they'd felt uncomfortable and stayed quiet. There was more of it than I had realized, or maybe I had always sensed it was there, and had simply learned not to look directly at it. My sister didn't call. I heard through my cousin that things at home had become tense, that her husband had asked her questions about what people had described that evening, questions she apparently hadn't answered clearly. I didn't celebrate that. I didn't want her life to come apart. But I also wasn't willing to carry responsibility for what happened when the people around her finally saw what had always been there. My parents called 3 weeks later. We met for lunch at a diner near their house, the kind of place with laminate menus and coffee that arrives without being asked for. My husband came with me. We sat across from my parents in a vinyl booth, and for a few minutes everyone talked about the drive and the weather, and then my father set down his mug and said, "We owe you an apology." My mother nodded, her eyes were red at the edges. "We kept making excuses," my father said, "for your sister every time, and we told ourselves you were the strong one, the one who didn't need us to intervene." He stopped. "That wasn't a kindness to you, that was a convenience to us." My mother said quietly, "You should have been able to share your own wedding with people who were happy for you. The fact that you felt you couldn't, That's something we have to sit with. That's on us. I listened to all of it. I didn't rush to reassure them. I forgive you, I said when they had finished. I mean that genuinely. But I want to be honest, because I think we need to start from honesty now. I looked at both of them. Forgiveness and trust aren't the same thing. I can forgive years of silence, and that doesn't mean we pick up where we left off. Trust takes longer. It takes what you do next, not what you promised today. My father didn't argue. He nodded slowly and said, "That's fair." My mother reached across the table and put her hand over mine. "We'll do better," she said, "whatever that looks like." "I hope so," I said, "I really do." We hugged in the parking lot before going our separate ways. It wasn't a resolution, and it wasn't the beginning of an instant reunion. It was the first honest conversation we had ever shared, and that counted for something. Not everything, but something real. The following Thanksgiving, we didn't go to Mississauga. My husband and I hosted for the first time in the condo. We moved the dining table into the living room to fit everyone around it. My closest friend from university, two of his colleagues who had become real friends, his sister and her partner, who drove down from Barrie, my cousin and his girlfriend, and my aunt, who arrived early with a bottle of Ontario Red and a look on her face like she had been waiting for an invitation like this for a long time. We cooked for 2 days, turkey and sweet potato with maple, and a wild rice dish my husband had been quietly perfecting for months, and the butter tart pie from the bakery in Kensington Market, which had become, without ever being officially declared, our thing. The table was small enough that everyone could hear everyone else. Nobody was performing for the room. Nobody had a punchline cued. We laughed because things were actually funny, ate until we were sheepish about it, and stayed around the table long after the food was gone just talking, the way dinner is supposed to end. At some point late in the evening, my husband looked across the table at me with the expression he gets when he's content and not trying to announce it. I looked back. We didn't need to say anything. I've thought a long time about what it means to come out the other side of something like this. People tend to imagine these moments will be dramatic. A loud confrontation, tears, someone finally saying the thing that breaks years of silence open. Sometimes that's true. But what I remember most about that Thanksgiving at my parents' table isn't the moment my sister went quiet or the moment my husband walked through the door. What I remember is the feeling on the drive home afterward on the 401 heading back into the city, when the tension I had been carrying for so long I had stopped noticing it finally, quietly, completely left my body. I had protected something worth protecting, and it was still whole. People used to say, in the way people do when they mean to be kind, "You'll find your people." I used to find that phrase difficult. It implied I was still searching, still incomplete, still waiting for something to slot into place. What I know now is that finding your people isn't something that happens to you. It's something you build, deliberately, clearly, sometimes at the cost of the easier thing. By choosing to be around people who don't require you to shrink to be accepted, you decide it. One careful choice at a time. The family I grew up in taught me a great deal about endurance. The family I chose taught me something better. That peace isn't what's left over after you've survived long enough. It's something you can actually build, and live inside, and call home. And for the first time in longer than I can remember, that's exactly where I am.